What's up, gentlemen? Good to see everybody for another episode of The Blind Pig, courtesy of BGObsession.com. Quick intros before we dive. Well, we go feet first into this. And Paul just texted and said he'll be a couple minutes late. He's helping the missus with a car issue, so he'll get on when he can. But top left is Mark. Catch him on the board as Ohm. Bottom left is Bob. He hails as Neophyte. Bottom right is Chris. You can catch him as collaborating on an aligned vision. Top right is John. You can find him as Boone. And my name's Derek. You can catch me at Silent Threat. So come by, please join the board, join the conversation. I do want to say welcome to the new members. We've had a couple new members, and believe it or not, we've had a couple returning members that have been distant for a long time, which who appear to starting to get back into the fold. I don't know if it's the Adam Peters effect or the Snyderless effect, but it's happy to see a lot of some of these old heads back on BG Obsession and welcome back with open arms.
Yep.
I think we're going to see a lot of that, fellas. I mean, we talk about it being a new day all the time. Sometimes this is capital N, capital
This is
D,
actually
new day.
a new day.
It is. It really and truly is.
So we kind of talked, first off, we jokingly said this, but I will point it out. I will segue into the Adam Peters talk. But Ron Rivera, as much as we gave him crap, as much as we gave him a hard time, he was the man in charge navigating really turbulent times inside the franchise as well as outside. So the wins and losses obviously weren't good enough, but we did deal with a name change. We dealt with an ownership change, dealt with multiple lawsuits and a lot of things. So I will say thanks to Rivera for that before we totally move on from Rivera. But I noticed this picture on Twitter, and I don't know that I've seen Ron Rivera smile like that since he got to Washington or look that relaxed.
For those of you on the radio or listening to the audio pod, it's Ron Rivera with a young lady at Juliet, the new musical.
Romeo and Juliet. But he looks comfortable. He looks relaxed. He looks like he's moved on. He looks like things are good. So hopefully, Ron, wish him luck. You know, as much as it's frustrating that, like we said, the wins and losses weren't there. He was there for some tough stuff. So, anyways,
I think by the end of it, he was as glad to move on as we were.
True, very fair. But not even 5 days after the GM search started, or at least we were told the GM search was starting, we were given the idea that there was going to be a format. We locked down. Well, it still is but Harris got his guy, Adam Peters. I'm curious to hear your guys' total reaction now that it's official. We all kind of believe that it might be possible. Now it's actually happened. So I'd love to hear you guys speak out to Adam Peters. How are we feeling about the hire?
Well, go ahead, John, lead us off, brother.
You got to feel good that, and I know this has been mentioned a lot on the board and elsewhere, but you got to feel good that Washington had a major executive opening and they got the guy that everyone else wanted. And from the sounds of the press conference, it was not close. It was he wasn't considering going anywhere but Washington. That was the one thing about the press conference that took me aback a little bit, is just how like effusively excited he was to be in Washington. And that's just not something that, I mean, all of them say the right things when they get hired, but I don't think I've ever seen a coach or a front office guy that was that clearly and sincerely excited to be where he was, and that was Washington. So that shook me to the core.
Especially after he turned down 2 teams last offseason, right?
Correct. And he turned down interviews. He said this was the only interview that he gave this year. And he clearly had done a little bit of research. When I said before, new day, and this is what I'm talking about. It's not just us. It's hard to step back after 25 years of nonsense and see the team objectively. But I tried to put it into some context earlier today about if you're a guy like Adam Peters, who's at that point in his career where he has, he's either going to stay where he is and maybe eventually ascend in San Fran, or he's got a chance to do something here to resurrect one of the historical franchises in the NFL, right? 1932. There's only a few places in the country and cities in the United States where football has as much potential to be reborn as it does here. That's A. Then you've got the obvious things that they're talking about on the radio, and we all know he's got a chance to be the guy, bring in his people, bring in a coach. The coach then gets to bring in OC and DC. I haven't heard a whole lot of talk about that. We're not just getting a head coach, we're getting an entire new staff probably. Then there's the cap space thing. I never looked at the final number. I don't know where we rank, but it's in the top 3 in the NFL in terms of cap space available for a new GM. That's like candy. The number 2 overall pick in a year when there are these consensus high quarterback picks to use either on a quarterback or to trade down. It's the 8th largest TV market in the country for sports. That it just lines up for this massive thing. And if you're just looking at that, you can see why it's so attractive to a guy like Peters. We're all saddled with 25 years of battle scars and thinking, hey, nobody wants to come to Washington. That's not how it looks from outside, literally overnight.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So to put a number to your statement there, Mark, it's actually we're number 1, not top 3, number 1, according to Spot Track. I'm guessing there are different numbers on different sites, having looked around enough, but this is the one I tend to go to. $84 million under the cap, and that's top 51. So top 51 contracts, we're 84 million under. That's 10 million better than the next closest team, which is the Houston Texans at number 2.
Oh, and we have 5 picks in the top 100. That's
Right. That was on my list, and I just bleed right over it.
I want to go back to something I said a while ago. This has been in the works for longer than 5 days. There's no way you make a hire like this in 5 days, or less. That we're talking a major executive here. Corporations search for months to make this decision. The NFL doesn't have months, but this didn't happen in 5 days. And, first of all, the 2 guys that they announced on Monday as being part of this the committee a week ago, they were on board months ago. And I'd be willing to bet you that there've been conversations with guys 4 months about this. They knew who they wanted, and they knew they could get him. It was a matter of checking all the boxes. It took 5 days to check all the boxes.
Hey, Bob, I don't want to interrupt you, but I think Sheehan was reading this morning from an article that somebody posted this morning.
Mm-hmm.
We're going back through all of this and all the steps, and you were 100% right. And we've been talking about this. This has been going on for weeks and weeks and weeks behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm.
We need to track down that article and post it on this.
I want to look at it from the other direction for a second, though. It's not very often that GMs change teams in the NFL. As a general rule of thumb, you don't get multiple bites of the apple in the NFL as a general manager. You go one place and you succeed or you fail. You typically don't go somewhere else and start over like coaches do. General managers tend to be one and done kind of guys. Hey, there's a Paul. And for Adam to have turned down interviews last year and only taken one this year, and all indications are that this was the place he wanted to come. This is not a dumb guy. Nice. This is not a dumb guy. I mean, his whole career is made up of fairly smart decisions. There's a reason he was number 1 with a bullet for every single team in the league who was looking for a general manager this year. For that matter, he was probably number 1 last year too. And he chose us. I probably haven't been any more surprised than than I have been. The last time I was this surprised was when my wife said yes.
We were all surprised, Bob.
Yeah.
I know. When she
And
said,
then, and then she agreed to marry him.
and everybody else in the world is still surprised that she said yes. But you know, I mean, it's just it's that crazy that the guy wanted to come to Washington.
And we didn't have to completely overspend, send a private jet, lock him in the basement, and tell him he wasn't leaving without a contract.
Well, was it 5 mil a year? Did I have that
Sounds
right?
right.
That-
5 years. I heard 5 years at 5 mil a year.
which sounds low, right? If it had been 10, I wouldn't have been surprised.
I'll bet you there are plenty of incentives in there. He probably gets fairly significant bonuses for every playoff game won, and if we win the Super Bowl, Lord knows what happens.
Well, fuck, I'll chip in. I got some money.
I got enough in my pocket for Starbucks. You know, I'll give you a
Yeah.
latte. It's all good. But I don't know.
Chris, what was your impression, your first impression?
Clearly a very smart guy. He's also, I mean, just clearly. I liked when I look back through his bio that his college major was psychology. And I think that shows through his personality. I think he has empathy. He knows how to talk to people. He knows how to treat people like human beings. He's not a bully. He wants to lean on other people to collaborate with and to get a lot of different voices in the room. It's everything I wanted to hear. I mean, you know, the terms have been thrown out, whether it's grand slam, home run, slam dunk, triple bull, whatever. I'm impressed. The other thing that I liked was, you know, we heard throughout the process up until the hiring that they were looking for a head of football operations. And I assumed that, or maybe incorrectly, that was going to be a title. And it's not, he's a general manager. But I kind of got through the tea leaves from, you know, all of the multiple sources that I listened to, that in order to make sure that if all goes well, that they can keep him with the organization and someone can't poach him by offering him a higher position, they've left those higher, you know, 1 or 2 spots above him open so that they can slot him into that and keep him away from anybody else. And I thought, again, you know, that shows hair. They're just dealing at a different level. We're used to Snyder for decades. Josh Harris is playing chess. I don't even think it's fair to say that Snyder was playing checkers. Chinese checkers. I don't know. But
Maybe Harris is playing 3D chess straight out of Star Trek.
Yeah, I mean, it's very, very, they're putting together, you know, from the top down, just smart. And it's not something that we've had for a long, long time.
What struck you guys about, I got a couple comments to make, but I'll go last. What struck you guys during the press conference, if anything? That's really the first time we've had a chance to, let's be honest, unless you went out and on YouTube looking for Peter's videos, be careful what you search for, by the way. You probably never heard him speak or saw, you know, I mean, I probably could have walked past him on the street and not known who he was. What was your take based on what you saw and heard?
How 2 things. One, he went out of his way to say that this is not going to be a complete rebuild. That there's a lot of good in this building that requires leadership. And that's what's missing. He mentioned leadership twice. Now, there's a lot of coach speak in that, but he went out of it. I don't believe he was asked, are you gonna, you know, what's your plan? It was more along the lines of what's your timeline, and he made it a point to say that this is not going to be a complete rebuild. The other thing that jumped out at me was he made it a point to emphasize building through the draft. So those 2 things have meant a lot. That he said what he should have said, and 3 or 4 years from now, we might look back and say, you know, if we were to look back, he might have just been saying that. But if he truly believes those things, I mean that is huge because like what I don't want, I think all of us agree, the NFL's at a point now where you can turn the team around quickly, and we have the resources to do it. So hopefully he's got that same level of urgency.
For those listening in only, Paul joined us a little moment ago and hasn't weighed in yet. What do you got, brother Paul?
Yeah, I got three things that I want to talk about in regards to his press conference. There were three things in particular that caught my attention and gave me a sense of confidence that one way or another, we're going to be able to restore some of the pride that we used to have as Washington fans. I think we're ultimately going to be building towards something that we can be proud of, something that we can be very, very fond of. And there were three things in particular that Peter's talked about that gave me that sense. First and foremost, he emphasized, and Derek was alluding it to, first and foremost, he emphasized the idea of a long-term view towards roster building. So we're not just building our roster to be successful tomorrow. We're building our roster to be successful for the next 10 to 15 years down the road. And I don't think any one of us here would be opposed to having a team and having a roster that going into September, you can compete year in, year out. You might not always win Super Bowls, but you're going to be there.
Bingo.
We know with Snyder that it was always, the quick fix, taking shortcuts. Those all always ended up being recipes for disaster. So I really like the fact that he talked about that long-term view towards roster building, not just an eye towards tomorrow, but an eye towards the future as well. I really, really loved the fact, like, it brought a huge grin to my face when he said on two occasions yesterday that you're going to see signs of a tough and physical football team on the field that you can be proud of. And those are, to me, two of the pillars and two of the things and two of the foundational pieces that this team was built upon in the past. Our glory years, we were always a very, very tough and physical football team. And that goes back to that idea of identity. I know I talked about that last week, but he seems to have a clear sense of who he wants us to be. And for me, that's hugely, hugely important. You need to know who you want to be in order to eventually get there. And last but not least, the other thing that caught my attention was he talked about relationships. And Joe Gibbs always said, winning is just as much about the talent on the field as it is the type of people that you bring into the building. So he emphasized that idea of relationships, bringing in a coach here who is not only going to be a really, really strong X's and O's guy, but also bringing in a coach and a guy who simultaneously is a good human being. When you bring in good people, people want to play for you. And I think that is sometimes an overlooked aspect to building a team and building a successful organization. I was really, really impressed. And again, those three things were things that gave me a sense that we're ultimately going to go where we need to.
Bob?
I didn't get to watch the whole thing. The one thing that, and it's already been mentioned a couple of times, is that this isn't a complete teardown. Now, I did notice when he referenced foundational pieces, he didn't talk about several or a few. He talked about a couple. In my world, a couple is two. There's a hard number to that concept, right? I'd probably be more excited if he said there are foundational pieces here rather than imply some type of a number. I think we're all afraid that, it's a bigger, he was putting a pretty picture in front of us. I think maybe I'm afraid it's a bigger job than his press conference made it sound like. I hope it's not. I would love to be competitive next year. Although having watched playoff games this last weekend, it's possible we could be divisionally competitive by May. Um, just saying for you Cowboy and Eagle fans out there who may be listening. But I was, the other thing that came across to me was I'm not sure at 44 he's polished enough yet in front of the press to be insincere. Everything came across as sincere, but it also came across as maybe a little nervous because I'm not quite used to being the guy in front of the microphone. And I think guys like that are oftentimes, while they're careful, I mean, you've got to be able to speak executive speak to reach this level of the NFL. And so you've got to be careful. But at the same token, I think the careful comes from the heart. It didn't feel rehearsed or prepared, or it felt, this is what I think. And I kind of liked that. He also sounded like he knew what he was talking about, and we're not used to that in front of a microphone in Washington. It's been quite a while since anybody that spoke in front of a microphone in Washington sounded like they actually knew what they were talking about. And I did some quick math. Somebody tell me I'm wrong, but I think it's been since Charlie Casserly that we had a GM that was solely focused on trying to create something for the long term. I don't know that any guy that's occupied that seat since Charlie Casserly has been focused beyond the next September.
Well, I know we haven't had anybody since Charlie Casserly walked out the door that was the final say on personnel. We haven't had it. We've
It
had
doesn't matter
guys.
if
We've had guys who had the
ownership didn't allow that to happen, no matter who it was.
right.
We probably had some pretty good people coming in and out of the doors over the years, because Snyder would open up the wallet and make it worth their while. But when they got here, they found out that they didn't have any kind of authority when the push came to shove.
Yeah, ultimately the final voice was Snyder.
I mean, we've had so many coaches that had extreme pull, right? I mean, more Rivera for the last 4 years. Well, we already know coaches are focused on the next season. I think Gibbs probably came fairly close to total say on personnel his 4 years. Again, that's a coach, right? I mean, I love Gibbs and I trust him, but that's a coach, and they're worried about the next football game, right? And they always have been. Marty Schottenheimer had complete control over it. 1 season, again, that's a coach. This is the first time we've had a guy that didn't have on-field responsibilities, totally in charge of things, looking beyond just the next season to build a roster since Charlie Casserly. And that kind of blows my mind. I was 29 when Casserly left.
And I would just add a presumably to that, Bob. I'm not saying that Harris is going to be a controller. That's not his history. He's been pretty involved so far, though. And maybe that's just out of necessity, but
I'm sure that's a lot of that's out of necessity because they didn't have the right people. There wasn't the right structure in place for him to not be involved.
Well, we haven't gotten any indication from him that he's not true to his word. He has been involved in the process of bringing in his football guy because he had to be. He got professional help. He got Myers. He got Spielman, and he kind of turned it over to them and listened to them, and then they made the final decision. Now, if he's true to his word, we've got the football guy who's the final say on football matters, and Harris turns his attention to things that he should be looking at and be involved in, like stadium things and improving Ashburn, for the love of God, because it's such a dump by NFL standards. So, and until Mr. Harris gives us reason to not assume he's going to do exactly what he says he's going to do, which he's done all along, I'm not going to borrow trouble on that.
The last thing I'll throw out there about what I have heard from the press conference is it felt like, I mean, we've seen Josh Harris now multiple times in front of the media at the mic talking. It felt like a clean handoff from one guy to the next. This feels very much like a hire that is in line with the guys at the top of the pyramid. We don't have somebody in the chief football position that's out of step with ownership. I mean, it felt very much like a Josh Harris press conference, even though Adam Peters did the vast majority of the talking. And I really like the fact that it feels like they're all on the same page. Maybe I'm completely wrong and they're not, but it sure feels that way to me. So
I think the one thing that Harris did that was very smart, very wise, it goes a little bit under the radar, and it wasn't necessarily the most popular thing as it went through. But I think him allowing Rivera to finish out the season added a little bit more shine to the ownership halo. And I think other people outside of the organization within the business, I think those things matter.
Yeah, I agree with that,
Showed
Chris.
that he's willing to sit back.
He's not a reactionary guy.
Yeah.
He's
He
not
did-
going to
he-
do something for effect or to make people feel better. He's going to, and he said that, and I was glad he said it because I've been saying the same thing, so I felt smart.
He said what he was going to do, and he did it.
Yeah, and he said he didn't see any real benefit to doing something in midseason. It wasn't going to provide any benefit, and I think that's what smart people, a lot of fans felt that way.
Well, and I think as Chris is alluding to, it's not only not a negative, it's a net positive in terms of how it looks from the outside looking in.
Yeah, exactly.
I thought he did a great job. Before I forget, the only other thing I wanted to say about Peters in that conference is you guys touched on a lot of the things that I would have said. The one that is the kind of thing you observe on a podcast while you're drinking bourbon, but he halfway through his conference, I'm listening to his comments, and it's like the anti Bruce Allen. It's the anti Vinny Serrato, where they are so intent on making you aware that they are the smartest guy in the room. There was no condescension. There was no smugness. It was a guy who, I mean, unless he's a great actor and he's really a complete opposite of what he looked like, he looks like a guy who's when he says, I'm humbled and I can't believe I'm sitting here and I'm.
So while Mark gets unfrozen, I just wanted to add to that I kind of feel like he came across like a total Eagle Scout in that open presser. Like, I mean, everything from telling his wife how much he loved her, and
to thanking
the guy's a literal like boys or Eagle Scout.
His high school coach.
And there's nothing wrong with that. I thought that was really kind of sweet, to be honest with you, if that's okay to say that. I just wanted to mention, I thought there was one. I didn't believe half of what he said, because I think they're going to. How much more of a blow up can you have? We're already halfway through a huge blow up. I mean, you're cleaning house essentially.
Right.
There might be a couple people that maybe Marty Mayhew sticks around. There might be some scouts that stick around, certainly through the draft. And I mean, he may not fire the receptionist, but they're going to clean a lot of house, and it's already in progress. So I didn't believe that. That was, I mean, I think that's a smart thing to do. You don't want people under any more anxiety than they already are, and you want them to work hard for you while they're still there. But I thought the only thing that he said that was struck me is like whether he intended it to be brutally honest or not. It was back to what you said earlier when they asked him about the talent on this roster. I think that was David Aldridge asked that question. What's your assessment of the talent here? And Al Galdi this morning actually timed it.
The pause.
3.3 second pause.
Yeah.
An awkward pause. And then he said, and I just want to, I know you've already said it once, but I just want to stress it. He didn't say there's a ton of talent on this football team. He didn't say, and that's what 99% of guys in that position would say. He said there's a couple of foundational pieces.
Yeah.
So when he was talking about not blowing it up, I don't believe him. And I think a lot of the roster is going to get blown up. And then the only other thing that I heard that I thought was interesting was somebody tried to get him to bite, was probably Scott Abraham, because he always tries to throw those grenades out there.
Quarterback, yeah.
He asked the question about the quarterback, and I thought he did a really good job of that, which is just like every other position. We'll evaluate that.
We'll evaluate, yeah.
He did not give any like candy coating or So, I mean, I don't think it means anything either way. They may love Hal, or whoever the head coach is may decide they love Hal. But anyway, I like the fact that he's not already like elevating guys above everyone else, right? Everyone's in the same bucket. That's what I heard.
Hey, Derek, before you move on, and I don't know if anybody else saw it because I saw it right before I logged on here. Jerry Jones released a statement that he's keeping Mike McCarthy as head coach of the Cowboys
Next year. Yep.
for
I
next
did
year.
see that.
We should all be celebrating.
Yes.
As sad as that sounds, you're absolutely right. And I just saw on Twitter a few minutes ago some alluding that Sirianni's safe too. So
Translation: no one would answer my phone calls. Bill Belichick's been on a busy tone for 3 days.
Could I add one more thing about that press conference that just popped in my head a few
Totally.
seconds ago? The final thing that I want to mention that I was quite impressed with was the following. That being that I got the sense that Peters has a clear understanding that this job is different than, let's say, for instance, taking the same title and same position in, I don't know, Arizona. He seems to understand how special this franchise is, how special this franchise is to the National Football League. And I think going into the position with that mindset is hopefully only going to make him work that much harder to restore a level of excellence in a city that deserves excellence from its football team. So that has me motivated, and that has me in a positive mood as well, because I think that's important to understand how special this role in Washington is.
Well, he's got a lot of work to do. What do you think he did in his first full day at Ashburn today?
Vacuum the floor.
I think he sat down with his Rolodex. If I don't know, they don't have Rolodexes anymore, but he was on the phone talking to anybody and everybody going to be associated with the head coaching search, which is now order of business one. We took care of one, so this is now order of business one. Got to get a head coach on board.
Don't you think, though, a guy like him, who he had to know if he wasn't going to be a GM next year, it was going to be because he didn't want to be. Don't you think he's had a list in his pocket for like a year?
I absolutely do.
You're probably right. He's calling people, but I think he probably already knows. Like, he probably knows at a detail level every single name that he wants. I would guess he does, but that's just a guess.
It wouldn't surprise me if he didn't spend a good bit of today meeting people.
True.
Because he's going to have to make decisions about a lot of people inside this organization that he may not know. And he strikes me as the kind of guy that doesn't want he doesn't just, who is this? He's interested in not just a great football coach, but a great human. I think part of the reason he's interested in that is because he's a great human, and great humans try desperately to treat other humans well. He recognizes he holds the careers of a lot of these people in his hands. And my guess is he probably spent some time meeting people today, talking to them, getting a sense of who they are and, what they think about this football team, and maybe just what they think about life. Who knows?
Yeah, head coaching interview starting tomorrow and continuing into Friday. I don't know if you'll be involved in that on the virtual.
I would.
Is someone keeping a roster of who we've talked to? I know he talked Zoom. He had a Zoom meeting with Johnson yesterday, I believe. Has he had any other Zoom
Johnson's
meetings?
tomorrow.
Johnson's
Or Friday. Johnson's Friday.
I thought he already had one. Okay, I misheard.
Raheem is tomorrow. I'm not sure. Is Slowick tomorrow?
I think he might have already had Slowick. I was looking at but Johnson is Friday, and Quinn. I think Dan Quinn's Friday also.
Dan Quinn's tomorrow.
Or Dan Quinn's tomorrow. Okay.
That's what's being
Raheem's tomorrow too, right?
publicized in Dallas anyway, is that we're talking to Quinn tomorrow.
And I think Raheem is tomorrow also.
Well,
He's got a bit more latitude where Quinn and Raheem Morris are concerned because they lost, right? So they're not prepping for another football game. Whereas I think the rules are tighter on when you can talk to people specifically and for how long. And I don't know. I mean,
They can't do, the only restrictions now are they can't do a face-to-face interview until after the divisional playoffs are over. So after this weekend, they can do anything with anybody, but they can't do face-to-face until the divisional playoff round's over. That's my understanding.
you know, if I'm the head coach in Detroit, I don't want my offensive coordinator flying to Washington next week if I won this weekend, though.
I would imagine they would go to him.
That's a good point.
And there's nothing to say you can't do an initial interview, another interview virtually too. I mean, we're in post-COVID now, man. The virtual world is real.
Yeah. I mean, really, I mean, I had the same thought, Mark. I could hire somebody off of a virtual interview. Why do you need to be in the same room? I mean, it's nice, don't get me wrong, but like
Well,
you
they can
said,
already do the
different
virtual.
times we live
Right.
in.
Yep. Well,
They
so
could-
let's,
They couldn't do the virtuals last week. They had to wait until this week if they were still playing. The only people they could interview last week were 49ers staff and Baltimore staff because they were on a bye. For head coach, obviously not for front office.
I'm
so
just saying,
there's-
I think you could come to a 99% conclusion if you want a guy just based on a virtual interview.
yeah, and maybe before you sign a deal, you meet and you look each other in the eye and you shake hands. Plus, the agents have to be involved at some point because you got to do contract stuff. The internet is full of non-football people and people who aren't named Adam Peters want in terms of our next head coach. I'm kind of curious. Let's look at it from if based on what we now know, what little we know about Peters and the things he's had to say, what do we think he's looking for in a head coach? And I can tee it up, right? There's really two different kinds of hires. One is a leader of men, Jim Harbaugh, Mike Vrabel, Dan Quinn down a layer, Raheem Morris, all known to be guys who get it done in the locker room, but not necessarily, as opposed to the other kind of hire, the young hotshot Ben Johnson, Slowick, which have had a lot of success in the league and also have had a lot of flameouts. I have opinions on both kinds, and I could argue for either of those approaches. I'm kind of curious to hear what you guys have to say.
Well, I think one thing that gives him a lot of flexibility, perhaps leaning towards the younger guys, is that he's got a wealth of experience. I mean, he's been with 3 different major league winning franchises at a high level. And so he may not be as nervous. He may not be as inclined to be as nervous about an unproven guy as he might be otherwise. But I do think, he's got the relationship with Slowick, and everything I keep hearing is Ben Johnson. And one of the things I just wanted to mention about Ben Johnson is, other than the fact that he's obviously having a hell of a season and he's done amazing things at his current location, is he's a UNC guy. He was a walk-on quarterback at UNC. He graduated computer science and mathematics dual degree at UNC, so he's very smart. But one thing I think would be really interesting about him is the fact that we've got Sam Howell. We've got to figure out what he is and who he is. And we potentially could have Drake May in our sights as the alternative or the supplementary quarterback, presumably the starter, if we draft him at number 2. And that guy, Ben Johnson, is probably the best poised human in America to know what the right way to go there is. Like, I guarantee you he's watched every single game Sam Howell's ever played in college and probably pros. And he's watched every single game that Drake May has played. So if there's anyone that can make an educated decision on like what direction to go there, he would be it. I'm not saying that's a reason to make him your coach, but it would be a hell of an advantage because whatever he might not like either one of them, right? That's the other possibility. But I just thought that was an interesting thing to throw out there because he's really well poised to navigate that whole quarterback dilemma, which is a pretty important thing to be able to
Yeah,
navigate.
that's a good point. And he's still got people in Chapel Hill, right? That he's known his
yeah.
whole life, his buds. Then, yeah, so he's got a nice inside view of that.
Another thing is he also has some insight in how to rehabilitate a quarterback who's maybe a little on the fragile side. He's done amazing things with Jared Goff, and everybody, all of the pundits seem to feel like Los Angeles absolutely jobbed Detroit when they traded Stafford and Goff. It's not necessarily, granted, LA got a ring out of that deal, but Detroit's gonna have Goff long after Stafford's playing golf, and he's looking pretty good at the moment.
Yeah.
He's a good fit in that scheme they're running. They built a
is.
nice scheme for him.
Well, and you got to think that Johnson designed that around Goff's strengths, which feels like some other coaches that we were excited about once upon a day, who looked at a player and went, "This is what he does well. Let's do what he does well." Instead of, "This is what we do," the quarterback's going to have to figure out how to play the way we play. And I don't think any quarterback has ever done well in the NFL when tried to be forced into a particular pigeonhole. You got to figure out which pigeonhole they live in and then design your scheme around that. And Johnson's proved he can do that, which is a little different maybe than a lot of the other guys out there.
Make the same argument about Sloak, though. Look what he's done.
You absolutely can. You absolutely can. And I'll be honest and tell you that I'm a little excited about the concept of having somebody off the Kyle Shanahan tree. Every one of those offensive guys that's worked under Kyle Shanahan has gone on and done. Slowick made the #1 defense in the league look poor this last weekend. And all Matt LaFleur did was take Dan Quinn to the woodshed. He just took Dan to the woodshed. So I don't know. I don't feel like there are any bad names on the list right now.
Derek, what do you got on coaches, man? What are you thinking Peters is all about here?
I go back and forth because if you really look at it, you wonder. Harris has never owned an NFL team. Neither has anybody in his group. Peters is a first-time GM. So you do wonder if they're going to put their heads together and say, we need a seasoned guy. Now, that's not with a route I would go, but you do wonder if they were going to opt for that. Maybe a Dan Quinn type, somebody who's been in the league for an extended period of time. That being said, I think Eugene Shen's a big part of it. And then Peters likely on some level has a relationship with Slowick, because Slowick came up through the 49ers at one point, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yes.
I think their paths crossed in San Francisco.
I believe that.
So I wonder if that relationship kind of piques the interest. I think Ben Johnson's the name. I think they're going to go hard after Ben Johnson. But I don't know that I am kind of intrigued, like Bob said, about somebody off the Shanahan tree. And the other thing that someone pointed out today that I hadn't even realized was Mike Shanahan would have all of his up-and-coming coordinators start on defense and then transition to offense. Because he used to tell them the best way to understand offense is if you understand defense. So Slowick, if you look at his history, came up on the defensive side of the ball. And then he moved over to the offensive. So if you're talking about as a head coach, somebody who's experienced both sides of the locker room, that I don't know that necessarily gives him a major step ahead of another guy, but it's definitely something to consider when you're looking at somebody to hire. I like Slowick. I'm a Slowick guy. I'd love to see Slowick come in here for a couple different reasons, including what he's done with CJ Stroud and then doing it with Nico Collins, who had not been performing anywhere near what he is this year, and a rookie in Tank Dell. So there's something to that scheme, but Ben Johnson has come out and said he's a big guy to focus in the line. So, both of them are kind of doing the right things and saying the right things, but analytically speaking, with Shen and some of these other guys, I think ultimately it's going to end up being Ben Johnson.
Where are you, Paul, on the coaching thing?
I personally, you guys know that I'm a big Harbaugh guy. It's not going to be Harbaugh, I know that, but I like that idea of having a leader of men, which you made reference to with your initial question, Mark. I like the idea of leader of men. I think this team needs some accountability. I thought last season and even in some previous seasons, players weren't being held accountable. I think that can go a long way towards reestablishing a culture, reestablishing an identity within this team. So I think that the leader of men avenue has some worth and has some value to help this team turn a corner and to help this team get reestablished. That being said, the young up and coming coordinator, I would be really excited with, whomever, Slowick, Johnson. I love the fact how with Ben Johnson, his offensive line is as much a contributor towards that team's success as any other player or aspect of the offense. So I can get behind the young up and comer. But I really think this team needs a little bit of a kick in the rear end too. So leader of men, I'm all for that too.
I'm on Harbaugh. I was thinking about this earlier, Paul. For one thing, we know that ship has sailed, right? For one,
Yes.
we haven't asked him for an interview. For two, he's going to want personnel control, and that's not happening here. The only name on the list we do have that I'm not excited about is Dan Quinn. He had a nice little run with Atlanta for the first couple of years, and then that team cratered badly enough that they fired him after 5 games in his last season there in Atlanta. I don't see that and it didn't help him that his team got his defense got schooled in the last time we saw them on the field. I'm hoping that that's not the guy. I'm pretty happy with everybody else on the list. The only name that's not on the list that I'm a little disappointed is Mike Vrabel. This is a guy who I love the way his teams play. It's a no-nonsense team. His game management always seems dialed in, like he gets the game in real time. I was kind of hoping that his name would pop up on the list, and maybe it will still. But beyond that, you scratch Dan Quinn off the list. Anybody else on that list that they're talking to, if they decide, they being Peters and Harris, that this is the guy, I'm going to be able to get behind it. There's some pretty solid candidates.
So I know Chris hasn't had a chance to talk, so I'll be brief, but I just wanted to mention one thing that came out that Harris said in the press conference, the Peters press conference, which was football IQ. It's important. It's really important. So I don't, Ron Rivera was supposedly a leader of man, and I don't know. I know I agree that the guy has to be a hell of a leader, but he also has to be able to look at the big picture and say, what's not working and how do we fix it? And we don't have that. We haven't had that in a long time. We have coaches basically admitting that they don't know how to fix it. So we need somebody that can not be a coordinator. I don't care how good a coordinator you were. It's not the same thing. You got to be able to take hold of the whole team, get everyone, herding cats in the same direction, and be able to fix and motivate. And I mean, it's hard to be a winning head coach, but I think that football IQ comment from Harris was a tell. Because I'm not sure everyone on that list is known for their football IQ. What do you got, Chris?
Well, obviously, I've never sat in a room been in a locker room, been on a practice field, or been on a sideline with any of these guys. So it puts me at a distinct disadvantage. So I can only go by my feel-good preferences.
Well,
My
you have
number
the
one,
same advantage as we do, bud.
yeah, I know. I'm just saying. I struggle with arguing between guys because I don't know. I couldn't.
Well, you got West and Harris looking over your shoulder, brother, so make it
Okay.
count.
I would personally prefer that we go younger and we go offensive side so that there can be continuity over the years, at least the first couple of years, if it works out. I believe it's easier to find a good defensive coordinator than it is to find and keep a good offensive coordinator. Wink Martindale, anybody? I think he's looking for work. And as far as the quarterback dilemma goes, I don't believe we really have a quarterback dilemma because I don't think that they're going to be arguing over Sam Howell versus one of the top guys coming out in the draft. I think they're going quarterback. And I think they'd be crazy not to go quarterback. So I would take Bobby Johnson over Slowick for only one reason. And that's that he has 100% more experience as an offensive coordinator. He's been it for 2 years. Slowick's been it for 1 year. And that's the only way I can separate the two.
Be nice to be able to sit in the room and listen to the interview, because part of Peter's job is going to be to determine if this is a guy who can be the guy and not just a great coordinator. And we will not have the benefit of that. None of us will.
Yeah.
HBO needs to do Hard Knocks.
Hard Knocks interview edition.
And
I'd like to do that. I'd like to be that fly on the wall just to see what the interview is like for a head coach in the NFL. I mean, how much is it X's and O's? How much is it talk to me? I mean, what are your ideas? Who do you want? What do you, I don't even know where you begin with this interview. Maybe because I'm not an NFL insider, but I would just be curious to see the process. Screw the actual answers.
I bet you it's a detailed planned process, what they're going to ask. Harris strikes me as like a Malcolm Baldrige quality award kind of a guy. I'm surprised that we haven't heard the phrase core competency yet, but we probably will. The way he talks, I think he's all about what's the best practice interview. We're not just it's not gonna be like Snyder where you invite him out to the house and two hours later your offensive coordinator candidate is now the head coach. It's not going to be like that. It's going to be very structured, probably multiple interviews, even though, I mean, look, Peters, they knew that's who they wanted, but they went ahead and followed the process and interviewed he and Ian Cunningham. And I think that's probably because they want to make sure everyone in the room, that there's no, that once they make a decision, everyone's on board with the decision. And anyway.
One thing that I found interesting in that article that you were talking about, Mark, and by the way, it was written by Albert Breer and it's in Sports
That's the one. Yeah.
But the process that they went through for the interviewing of the general manager candidates per the article is that the first interview was a 2.5-hour interview with each of the GM candidates, only with Rick Spielman. And he referred to Spielman as being the gatekeeper. And then Spielman would recommend on to Harris and his name escapes me, the gentleman from the Golden State Warriors.
Bob Myers.
To Bob Myers. And then those two would have a second 2.5-hour interview with the candidate. Then they would part, and the next day they would bring back for a third interview, and it would be Harris and Myers, and I believe Rails came in, and Blitzer came in, etc., for the final interview. So if that holds true through the head coaching search, it wouldn't surprise me that the first interview for any prospective head coach would be with Spielman, and that would be an opportunity for X's and O's to be covered, or schemes or philosophies or that sort of thing before they get onto the bigger issues in the next interview.
And or Peters, right? He's going to be buying the groceries for the coach.
Yes,
I think, if I'm hiring a coach for to run a professional sports franchise and I'm the owner, I think my first question is simply going to be, tell me about your vision. Tell me how you'd go about this. And then based on those answers, you just take off from there. Just get them to start talking. What are you going to do? How are you going to do it?
Agree.
One thing that I think bears watching, because a lot of people are drawing, conclusions from, well, Peters was with Slowick in San Francisco, or they'll draw other connections with different candidates. We just need to remember that just because they were in the same place together doesn't mean, he could have thought he was an idiot, either guy.
That's very true.
It doesn't necessarily mean it was left a positive impression, or that the guy wowed him. You just don't have any way of knowing that stuff.
Rick Spielman's son is on the staff of the Detroit Lions, for whatever that means.
Ah, there you go. Adam Peters was a scout with the Patriots when Mike Vrabel was playing there.
There's anymore. It's like you can connect dots. It's like
Oh,
3
yeah.
degrees of separation all through the
yeah.
NFL. So, but that is a stark contrast. The fact that the gatekeeper was Spielman, it wasn't even Harris. Like,
Which one of these guys knows Kevin Bacon? That's all we got to find out. We got it. But
Well, these are exciting times, my friends.
they
Yeah,
are.
I know we probably won't have a coach in place by next Wednesday, but it's possible. This
It
could all
definitely
happen
is
fairly
possible.
quickly.
It's gonna be must. Like Twitter is gonna be must watch. The Monday after the
Yeah, this
Lions
coming
get
Monday.
eliminated or finish the Super Bowl, and the Monday after the Texans finish their season, whether that be being eliminated or going all the way.
I'm this close to IR because I have a strained refresh finger.
I would point out that I think these guys will be somewhat careful about the timing of everything. The Cardinals paid a little bit this last year for
Cannon.
the alacrity with which they announced their head coaching candidate following his finish in the Super Bowl. And that's got to be fresh in everybody's mind in the NFL. You may be able to play fast and loose with the rules, but you can't be obviously playing fast and loose with the rules.
You can be rapid, but or you can be thorough, but not too rapid. How about that?
Right.
I'm still trying to figure out what the hell the Patriots did with their new head coach. Like, okay, there's like the Rooney rule. There's like, I didn't even know that was possible.
That you could write it into a contract that they're a
I was gonna
successor.
say, from what I've read, it was written into his contract, and my guess is because he is a minority, that like you're hiring a minority. Do you have to interview 2 minorities to hire a minority? I think you only have to interview 2 if you're going to hire, your cisgendered white guy.
It doesn't seem like a very smart way to approach a position as important as head coach to me.
No, and I wonder if Kraft is kicking himself. There's no way he envisioned Mike Vrabel being available.
Yeah.
Right. I mean,
that just made so much sense. I assumed that was a done deal the minute Vrabel was out.
yeah.
Crazy. Well, I'm going to be watching.
Vrabel takes a year off to relax.
Wow. I hope he talks to
doesn't
us.
strike me as that kind of a guy.
You're right.
Am I the only one? I mean, I really would like to hear from that guy and have him interviewed and have him I'm sort of picturing him as the head coach guy, and then you shop for an OC and a DC, right? You actually have a head coach. I think we'd be foolish not to at least talk to him, but what do I know?
All right, gentlemen. Next week, hopefully, maybe, kind of, sort of, at least some clarity. We can. I'm sure we can dig if anything comes up, we can dig into some of the names as we'll know. We may know more, but any more closing points?
We should definitely thank Mr. Harris and our new GM Adam Peters for joining us tonight. From Florida. So,
speaking of Florida, did you see the house? That's probably the smartest thing Harris did, was interview them out of away from the facility. Like, no, you don't want to come see that. Come to my house in Miami, and we'll go play golf or something.
In that Breer article, he said that he conducted the interviews in Harris's offices in Miami. So I don't know if he has offices or if they meant his home office.
It's in the east wing of his home.
Has a completely separate entrance from the family entrance.
Around the corner from the
Absolutely.
bowling alley, but if you get to the sauna and full gym, you've gone too far.
All right, gentlemen. It's been a
Guys.
pleasure.